All right, we should be live. Oh, there we go. All right, still listening. Yes, just me. Okay, cool beans. We are up and running. So a lot of people said that they were going to jump on the recording, so we'll make sure that it's fun for everyone. So first of all, if you're listening to this and you're 8 days in, give yourself a big pat on the back. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to change your diet in a way that's that dramatic. I think is awesome. Now, some of you may have fell backwards or slipped up a little bit, and please put in the comments if you're experiencing any kind of cravings that are seemingly difficult to deal with. And I want to go through some prepared remarks here, a little bit of a presentation to kind of keep me on track. So I'm going to share that in just a moment. But let's see if I can. Give me just 1 second. All right, so everything seems to be working. I'm on the StreamYard, and I'm on the YouTube feed, and I just don't see where everyone is, which I normally do see where everyone is. All right, it is what it is. So I'm going to go right into my prepared statements for today, just to kind of bring everyone up to speed on what we should be thinking about. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, while that's loading, sorry about this, guys. Everything just seems to be moving super, super slow here. And I pay for a very good internet service. Okay. And I'm going to hit present, and I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Okay. So what we want to discuss here today, and again, thank you for your patience. I know it's taken us a few minutes to kind of get up and running and started here. So again, thank you for that. And we want to go into what's happening in week 1. What's happening to your body. Now, if you've been following the recommendations here, first of all, some of the challenges that people can have, most of you are doing fantastic. Energy is up. Bowel movements are good, sleep is good, pain is down, inflammation is down, but there are some symptoms, right? Some people are having some symptoms, and those symptoms can include challenges with stool, going to the bathroom. That could be loose stool, it could be diarrhea, seeing a little bit of both. And there's been some issues related to cravings. I think from an energy standpoint, I haven't heard much as far as low energy. Usually the low energy is kind of something that happens in the first 3 or 4 days. What happens is the storage that you have of sugar or glycogen, which is the storage form of sugar, is depleted, right? Because we're not eating carbohydrates. And there's a delay in the body's self-defense response system to manufacture a different kind of fuel that we call ketone. And if the ketones are delayed going up while the glycogen is going down, well, then we're low energy and we can experience cravings and things of that nature. But after just a few days of that, most people will their liver will just start pumping out ketones. And then it's a matter of your cellular machinery being upgraded, so to speak, in order to start using that efficiently as a fuel. And that can take a little bit of time. We call that the ability to do that quickly. We call that metabolic flexibility, and metabolic flexibility should be something we all pursue. It's the ability to adapt to a fasting and a feasting state. We've lived our entire lives as Americans, for most of us, or Westerners, or part of the industrialized first world, where we've had great abundance and we've had mostly opportunity to feast, very little opportunity for famine. And again, famine not so much in the context of long-term famine, but short-term lack, which is something our body is really designed to deal with. The carnivore experience is not necessarily a fasting experience unless you made it that way. And a carnivore experience is not necessarily a ketogenic experience unless you made it that way. Now, following the instructions that we have here, we're not eating fruit, we're not eating honey. Those are the two things that would knock you out of ketosis. So being on a carnivore diet, you are in ketosis. It's just how deep are you going into ketosis? Going deep into ketosis requires you to really go out of your way to really skyrocket how much fat you're eating and to do some pretty extended fasting. That'll take you deep into ketosis. Now, again, just to kind of bring everybody up on the same page, what is ketosis? It's getting your body to switch to an alternate fuel. Just imagine you have a car that could have a regular gas tank and a diesel gas tank, and when you can switch from one to the other. Cars don't do that, but our bodies can, where we can use a high-powered fuel like glucose, or we can use a long-duration, low-intensity fuel like ketones, which is derived from breaking down dietary fat and body fat. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Again, this is not a ketogenic program, but you're going to benefit from ketosis and you're going to get the long-term benefits of metabolic flexibility. So when it comes to, let's see if we can just slide this over here. Hold on a second. All right. Let's do this again. Here we go. Okay. So why carnivore? Because many of you have heard or may have experienced to some degree that you're going to lose some weight. And, you know, we had this conversation the last time, right? We said that weight loss is, you know, this kind of innate need we all have to kind of look good naked, right? And that there's nothing wrong with that. We all want to look good naked. We all want to be lean, but we know that when we look good, we can also feel good. And you know, it's not just about our vanity. But vanity is not something you want to entirely ignore either. It can be very motivating. So there should be some weight loss. Also, what many people experience on this is an increase in energy. And, you know, January hits and we can feel after the holidays kind of sluggish and slow, and our energy can start to drop. And that's not a good feeling. And then, of course, digestion is another reason why a lot of people will go through this process. Some people have chronic long-term digestive issues, irritable bowel syndrome, long-term loose stool, constipation, alternating loose stool and constipation, gastric reflux, where you're getting that heartburn kind of feeling. You can also have also have gas, bloating, some of the symptoms of what people call SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So weight loss, energy, digestion. Another reason that people do carnivore from a medical standpoint, and where it's gotten a lot of attention and where there needs to be a lot of research done, and they're starting to, is in the realm of autoimmunity. And that's tied to digestion, because almost every autoimmune disease gets its start in the gut, and we'll explain that in just a bit. And then, of course, brain function, right? So people feeling like they want to fall asleep after lunch, and experiencing brain fog, things of that nature. Now, we're going to go through each of these one by one, and discuss what the mechanisms are and what some of the challenges are. But I will tell you, from a weight loss standpoint, you have to look at, you have to understand that every cell in your body. So I have a slide here of two cars, right? One is an old muscle car, and the other one is a modern Toyota Prius. And, the old muscle car, think about yourself when you were 18 or 19 years old. You're running around, when I was growing up, playing sports and hopping fences and chasing girls and doing all that stuff. You're basically running like an old muscle car. Super powerful, super fun, maybe sexy, right? And when you're running like that, you're using, for the most part, a type of fuel. When you're running hard and heavy, you're using a kind of fuel that we call glucose, or just think about it as, the car that you're driving, the muscle car that you're driving, gets really low gas mileage, but it's fun, sexy, good looking, and it makes a lot of waste, right? Smog, pollution, etc. But you're young and you don't really care. Then you get a little older and you start, you don't necessarily need a Chevelle, an old muscle car to go to the supermarket or to go to Rite Aid. And instead, you'd rather have something a little bit more fuel efficient, that doesn't pollute the environment as much, that gets a lot more miles per gallon, and you start driving a Prius. Well, just imagine the same vehicle could switch back and forth from one to the other. When we're looking to lose weight, we want our body to lose fat. We don't really want to lose weight. We don't want to lose muscle. We want to lose fat. Well, fat is the fuel that drives the Toyota Prius, whereas carbohydrates is the fuel that drives the muscle car. And when we're predominantly using the fuel that drives the muscle car, we have to keep on refilling it because you're getting really bad gas mileage. So you have to eat multiple times a day. But when you're driving like a Toyota Prius, well, then you're far more fuel efficient. You don't have to eat all day. Matter of fact, if you measure your thirst by the needle going down on the gas gauge, well, then you're not going to be as hungry because you have so much body fat to use. Even an elite athlete has 20,000 calories available at any given time. An elite athlete that might have 6% body fat. Most of the people in this group have way more than 6% body fat. I know I'm one of them. And by having 20, 40, 60, 100,000 calories worth of fuel, you don't really have to eat for a long time if your brain knew that it was there. And we'll talk about how your brain is going to know that that's there. But what we want is for you to burn clean, and we want you to burn efficiently, like a Toyota Prius. Now, and again, I'm going to use these car analogies and these engine analogies a lot. Just imagine your body is, you have two kinds of fuel. You have the powerful fuel, the muscle car fuel, and you have the Toyota Prius efficient fuel, the diesel, so to speak, and the other type. This gas truck that you see here has a big tank in the back that it usually uses to deliver fuel. And then it's got the little tank. And that little tank is what drives the engine of that truck. Now, that little tank can only hold, let's say, 300 miles worth of fuel. But just imagine you hooked up the big tank to the engine. You could drive across the country back and forth a few times without ever stopping for gas, because that big tank is so big. But that big tank is not hooked up to the engine. So instead, we have to use the little tank, and we have to stop repeatedly to refuel that little tank. So now the analogy here is that if you're this truck, you have a liver that can hold about 400 calories. And that liver is only so big. It can only hold so much glycogen or fuel. So that's your little tank. Think about the big tank as being your body fat. Your body fat has a vat, but there's no connection between your body fat and the engine of the vehicle. Now, if you could create a connection between the big tank and the engine of the vehicle, like I said, you could drive the thing without refueling, without stopping to eat, so to speak. The way in which we reconnect the big tank to the engine is by reducing a hormone called insulin. So the big tank is your body fat. The engine is the mitochondria in all of your cells. And by lowering your insulin, by not eating carbohydrates like we've been doing for the last 8 days, you are going to avoid stopping that connection. You're going to allow that connection so that the fat cells are free to release their fuel into the bloodstream. And when your fat cells are free to release the fuel into the bloodstream, well, then all kinds of great things happen because, number one, your brain says, oh, I'm okay for energy, right? Because with the little tank scenario, if you're disconnected from the big tank and you're just using the little tank, every time that little tank runs low, you get hungry when that needle goes down towards E. Well, now that needle is never going to go towards E. There's no reason to be hungry because you've unlocked all of this fat, and therefore your appetite goes down. This is the mechanism for weight loss. When your hunger decreases, you're not trying to eat less, you just do. So you find yourself in a calorie deficit, and therefore we lose weight. That's the mechanism for weight loss. Now, when sugar is in your blood, when your liver, which is holding all of that sugar, if it releases the sugar into the blood, your blood sugar goes up. And you get to use that sugar for fuel. Now, this is something that is very important because when sugar is in your blood, it's going to get there in one of two ways. You eat food, you digest the food, and you take the sugar. And, oh, we just had a little lighting issue. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. That sugar has a certain amount of energy we call calories. So think about it as, like your gas mileage. So 1 unit of sugar gives you, 1 unit or 1 gram of sugar gives you 4 calories of energy. Whereas 1 gram of fat gives you 9 calories of energy. So fat is far more energy dense. When you convert your fat into ketones, well, then it's a 1-to-1 ratio. You break the fat down, you turn it into ketones, you take those ketones and you turn it into energy. You take the food you eat in the form of carbohydrates, break that down into glucose. Glucose gets sent into the cell to be used for energy. They're both 4 calories per unit, okay? Now, when you have sugar in your blood, you have 2 choices. You can burn it, which means you use it. Your muscles move your body and you burn the energy, or you store the energy. And when you store the energy, you can't store it in your blood. You got to store it away in your liver. And when your liver is full, because it only holds 400, it's a small tank, it only holds 400 calories, well, then you have to store it. You have, through the help of the liver, you take that sugar and you convert it into fat and you put it into your fat cells to use for later. That's why we get fatter by eating carbohydrates. So you either burn it or you store it. You can't let it circulate in your blood because it is toxic. Ketones, on the other hand, ketones are interesting because if you're not using them, you don't really store them. You have a kind of an unlimited capacity to make them. The storage form of ketones is body fat. Once you convert the ketones, once you convert the body fat into ketones, if you don't burn it, you will breathe them out or urinate them out. You do not breathe out sugar, and you do not urinate out your sugar. If you do, there's certain medications that help you do that, but then you'll wind up with all kinds of infections, urinary tract infections. It's a sign of disease to have sugar spill into your urine. But ketones, extra ketones, can spill into your urine. They can go through your lungs. And that's interesting because, again, it's 4 calories. So you can go through the process of being in ketosis and you can get rid of anything extra in your blood very easily. Not necessarily the case with glucose or with sugar. So this is one of the key differentiators from a weight loss standpoint, because as you're burning fat and making ketones, and if you decide to sit at your desk for a few hours and you're not burning, it's okay. You'll send the ketones off into your urine, the extra ketones, and then on demand, you'll make more. Can't do that with sugar. You have to store it. You're either storing it in your liver, which is a small tank, or you have to store it in the big tank, which is body fat. Okay. Now, the only way you can get the fuel from the big tank into the engine is if you reduce the insulin present. Some people will say if there's no insulin. Well, there is a disease called type 1 diabetes where that happens, and it's a deadly situation. And that's exactly what happens. The fat cells shrink like crazy. And you go into what we call ketoacidosis. This is not an issue for anyone who's not a type 1 diabetic. So your insulin never goes to zero. But if your insulin is far lower than what it's always been, well, then now you can start releasing the fat in the big tank to be used for energy, and your fat cells shrink. The number of fat cells that you have in your body is exactly the same. The number of fat cells you have in your body is, something that doesn't really change after puberty. There are people who experience hyperplasia. That's, usually most of us have hypertrophy of fat cells. They just get either bigger or smaller, the same number of fat cells we have for our whole lives. Hyperplasia is much more rare. Certain genetic phenotypes will have that. And those are the people who are obese and they don't have any of these metabolic issues, but that, again, exceedingly rare. Now, fat cells cannot shrink in the presence of insulin. So therefore, we need to lower insulin. And that's why we went on a carnivore diet, because there are 3 kinds of food: fat, protein, and carbohydrates. We remove the carbohydrates entirely, and what's left is fat and protein, both of which, well, fat does not release insulin, contrary to some popular belief. Protein does, but on a gram per gram basis, nothing like carbohydrates. So there's a little bit of insulin release. You have to, in order to absorb amino acids. It's important. You need insulin. Without insulin, you're in trouble. And what's great about protein is that it tends to release a good amount of insulin, the right amount of insulin. Now, on a carnivore diet, and unlike a ketogenic diet, carnivore diet really accentuates the need for protein. And we have to do that because even though your level of ketosis will not be as deep, it doesn't have to be. Nutritional ketosis starts at 0.5 millimolar. You start to feel a difference at 0.8, 0.9. If you get from 0.8 all the way up to 1.5, you're doing fantastic. You're in nutritional ketosis. There are people who believe that they want to be at 3 or 4 or 5. And if you're treating cancer or epilepsy, maybe that's a benefit, but it's not necessary. And that's why, and again, by eating more protein than fat, I'm sorry, by eating more protein and not focusing on as much fat, not adding fat, that allows us to release enough insulin to get the benefit of insulin. When ketones are present and being used for fuel, because it's such an abundant fuel and your body, you have so much body fat, and again, even an athlete has so much body fat to use, there's no reason to break down protein. There's no reason to break down muscle. So being in ketosis preserves muscle. Super, super important. Weight loss programs that are just low calorie, you're going to lose fat, you're going to lose muscle, and the muscle loss makes that gas tank, we said was your liver, but makes the amount of storage space available for the sugars, for the carbohydrates that you eventually do start eating, a lot smaller. So think about the muscles in your body as a sink in which you can put sugar without it turning into fat. As we get older, that sink gets smaller. And if we lose weight too fast, well, then that sink gets smaller too fast. And when that sink gets smaller and smaller, there's less storage available for the carbohydrates you eat, even if you don't ever eat too much carbohydrates. So it's very difficult to get back from too much muscle loss. Especially the older you are, the more difficult it is. You have to go through a muscle building process. Ketosis, contrary again to popular belief, is not tricking your body that you're starving. You see, being hungry or fasting is not starving. Starving means you have no fuel that you're eating and you've run out of fuel from your body, right? You have to become emaciated before you are actually starving. So starving is more of a word we use to describe how hungry we are. But fasting for 5 days is not starving. Everybody listening to this can fast for 5 days. You are not starving. You're hungry, but you're not starving. Starving means you don't have fuel. And the more body fat you have, the longer you can go not to be hungry, to fast and not starve. That's an important distinction to make, because a lot of people say that, starving is the best way to lose weight, but it's not sustainable. Well, that's crazy too. Okay. All right. Increased energy. We reduce cravings simply because we reveal to the body, we reveal to the brain that you have an abundance of energy. That abundance of energy is coming from the fact that you're spilling all of these ketones into your bloodstream, and your brain says, oh, I have abundance. I don't have to be hungry. If you eat food that elevates your insulin, like refined carbohydrates in particular, but carbohydrates in general, if you elevate your insulin, you tell the liver to shut off the production of ketones. And when you shut off the production of ketones, you'll use what food you just ate in the form of carbohydrates for energy, whatever you stored in that little gas tank. And then as that runs low, you'll be hungry because you've shut off the ketone production. So after this month, and one of the last meetings we have, we're going to discuss what's the best way to come out of this and to reintroduce healthy carbohydrates into our lives. That'll be a topic for a couple of weeks down the road. But for now, just understanding what is going on in your body is so important. When your body feels safe, that it has enough fuel, it tends to be less hungry. So I'm curious, and again, I'm not seeing any live feedback here from you guys. Let me just check and see if there are any questions that have come up. Oh, here we go. Okay. Yes, first world problems. Somebody writes first world problems. That's why we're here. We're living in the first world. These are the problems of the first world, because the first world, if you don't pay attention, can kill you, or certainly make you very unhappy and sick. You know, in the third world, there are issues that can kill you, probably more rapidly. But in the first world, we have the slow demise of chronic disease due to overabundance. And you've heard me say this before, where the audio is cutting out. Audio is cutting out. Are you guys hearing me well? Give me a little feedback here. Give me a little current feedback. All right, I'm going to keep going. It seems like the audience is here. Okay, getting back to the first world problems question. So never in human history have we ever been in a situation where we've had such abundance of anything that's ever been called food in the history of the planet available to us at all times, dirt cheap, within arm's reach. We are genetically adapted to experience feast and famine, and therefore, because we no longer experience famine, all we do is feast. We're genetically not adapted to do that, and what do? We develop these modern diseases, and the modern diseases make us miserable, and then result in chronic disease. And chronic disease is, again, 80–90% of our healthcare bill in our nation is due to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and everything that is caused by what we're talking about here. So all we have to do is pay attention to what our choices are, learn how our body works, make better decisions, so we don't have to physiologically succumb to the first world problems that we've created. Okay. Now, give me 1 second to see. Audio is a bit choppy. Audio is a bit choppy. I don't know what to do about that. We're going to have you guys listen to the recording, because I know the recording is going to be fine. But in the meantime, I'm just going to keep on going. Let's see here. Okay. Food composition. What is natural and what is man-made? Now, when protein and fat come together, that's usually in the form of what we're doing, carnivore. That's going to be eggs. That's going to be fish. That's going to be beef, lamb, etc. When fiber is together with fat in nature, that usually is in the form of nuts. It's usually in the form of like coconut, almonds, walnuts, all those types of things, not necessarily peanuts, avocado, and olives. And fat and carbohydrates come together in nature only in one place, and that's dairy. So dairy can be a problem because fat and carbohydrates for adults is not a good mix. If fat is combined with fiber, that's good. Olives, avocado, etc., nuts and seeds, coconut. If fat and protein are together, that's good. Eggs, beef, etc., that's good. But when fat and carbohydrates are together, that occurs with dairy because dairy is milk, and milk is for infants. And infants are supposed to be obese. And no mammal on the planet will consume dairy into adulthood. We do. And humans are the only mammal actually that are actually born obese. And we want to be kept obese for those first couple of years. That's why we breastfeed. And then once we wean, we don't need dairy anymore, and our body starts to change. Now, for man-made food, if it's protein alone, it's usually because we've made it that way. It's a protein powder or it's a protein bar that you eat. But without the fat that comes with it, protein is not as efficiently broken down and utilized. And also fat and carbohydrates that are man-made, well, that's the worst food. That's just all the processed food, right? So if I take corn and I turn it into a flour, that means I've removed any fiber and it's just the carbohydrate. And I make a tortilla out of it and I deep fry that tortilla in oil of any kind. What do I have? I have a corn chip. And those corn chips are delicious. Or if I take flour from wheat and I make a dough out of it and I deep fry that dough, well, what do I have? I have a donut. And these are foods that are almost impossible to not thoroughly enjoy. When you take a refined carbohydrates that has no fiber attached to it, and you take a fat that's been removed from any fiber or protein partner, and you combine those two together, the human animal has never seen this before, and it is absolutely addicting. It goes to a part of the brain that is just almost impossible to, it's impossible to eat a single potato chip, right? Understand that. One, the natural food, nature's food, is energy dense and nutrient dense, whereas the man-made food is energy dense and devoid of nutrients. That energy density is something that your body just cannot deal with long term. Some people deal with it better than others. The younger you are, the better you can deal with it. Genetically, some of us, if we're closer to our indigenous ancestry, then we're going to do poorly. Native Americans do very poorly on a modern industrialized diet, whereas Europeans do a little bit, they fare a little bit better. But again, the same diseases occur. It just happens more rapidly and steeply in people who have indigenous genetics than people who have more of agrarian genetics going back many, many generations. So agriculture hit the Europeans 5,000 years ago. Agriculture didn't hit North American indigenous people until like very recently. So there's an inability to deal with it, and therefore that's why Native Americans have the highest level of chronic disease. So if you have, white Europeans here from, down here from a poor health standpoint, and then you have maybe Asian Americans, and then you have Hispanic Americans, and you have African Americans. Native Americans are just way up here. It's just not even close. And it has to do with living in the modern industrialized world with more native, being closer to your native genetics. Okay. It's weird. Everything is just moving so incredibly slow. Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, the digestive system. Now, when it comes to digestion, we have to remember one of the reasons why people go on a carnivore diet is simply because their inability to deal with fiber. Fiber is indigestible. It's plant food that we do not digest. We can ferment it. So what that means is food enters your system. We start to break down proteins and fats in the stomach and in the small intestines through acid and enzymes. And then as the food moves down, anything that comes from plant fiber is not going to be broken down. It can't be broken down until it gets into the large intestines, the last part of the digestive system, which is loaded with bacteria. And that's a good thing, right? The bacteria in your gut is believed to make up, it's believed that there's 10 times more cells in your gut, 10 times more bacteria in your gut than you have cells in your body. And in your gut, we mean the majority of which is in the large intestines. And those bacteria digest the fiber, and then they exchange and in exchange, they give us a healthy byproduct called short chain fatty acids. But our bacteria can digest fiber, we cannot. And therefore, what happens is when we eat refined, excessive carbohydrates, the bacteria in our colon, in our large intestine, starts to climb up into the small intestines where it doesn't belong. And it starts to feast on the food before it ever gets down into the colon. And that causes fermentation. Fermentation causes gas, bloating. And this is what people will call small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That means some people think there's bad bacteria. It's not bad bacteria. It's good bacteria. All the bacteria in your gut is good. But if it's in the wrong environment, then it's bad for you. And that's what happens. The presence of that much fiber can cause gas and bloating. Now, if you don't experience gas and bloating eating fiber, then it's not a big deal. But there are people who do experience that. Plant defense chemicals. Another reason why we want to go through the carnivore experience is because all plants make chemicals that are designed to protect the plant, right? No living thing on the planet wants to go extinct. The only way to prevent something alive from going extinct is to protect yourself. So animals protect themselves because they have muscles, brains, claws, teeth, and they can run or fight. But a tomato can't run away from you. But a tomato can poison you. And all plants have plant defense chemicals, and the plant defense chemicals are most abundant in roots, stems, leaves, and most of our vegetables are loaded with plant defense chemicals because they're trying to protect the plant from going extinct. And any insect, pest, rodent, squirrel, or human, or grizzly bear that eats that plant, it's going to get a little dose of whatever that plant poison is. Now, that plant poison might paralyze an insect and just irritate your gut in an unnoticeable way. But those plant chemicals are there. 99% of all the plants that exist on planet Earth are indigestible or poisonous to humans. Less than 1% is what we find in our supermarkets in the form of plant food. But virtually 100% of the animal foods that are available to us are fully digestible and nutritious to humans. So understanding that some of us are more sensitive to plant defense chemicals than others. The tomato was called the poisonous berry for a couple of hundred years in Italy. You ask any old Italian grandmother how they make pasta sauce, they will tell you to de-seed and peel the tomato. Now, they don't know why, but that stems from years and years and years ago when the tomato was a much more difficult fruit to digest, or vegetable to digest. I say vegetable. It technically is a fruit. It's a berry, but it's loaded with the plant defense chemicals to the point where we call them nightshades. They're actually a little bit more offensive than others. But we've also learned how to breed out some of those chemicals from the tomato. but many people are sensitive. So when they go carnivore, they find inflammation just goes down. They're not fermenting as much fiber. They have less gas and bloating. They have less symptoms of leaky gut. Now, the difference between fruits and vegetables is that if you think about it, well, when a grain like wheat grows and it makes a seed, that seed falls off right next to the parent plant and it makes a new plant. And then you have these like rows of wheat. But if an apple falls from an apple tree and the seed plants itself under the apple tree, well, that's not going to make a new tree because it's in the shade of the tree. So the seed, in order for the seed of the apple to become a new tree, that apple has to be taken away from the parent tree and brought somewhere else. So what happens is you surround the seed with fruit, and that fruit is very attractive to birds and animals. They eat the fruit and deposit the seed somewhere else so the tree can grow. That's the difference between vegetables and grains and legumes and nuts and seeds. That's what makes them different from fruit. Fruit doesn't have the plant defense chemicals that vegetables do. So a lot of carnivores, when they're done with this kind of carnivore experiment that we're going through, they will start eating fruit. They become fruitarians and, animal-based fruitarians. And that's a great way to go. Again, if ketosis is not important to you, and matter of fact, when you're metabolically flexible after going through this process, you can eat fruit and kind of weave yourself in and out of ketosis anyway. But fruits do not have those plant defense chemicals. Just don't eat the seeds. I mean, we all know this, right? Apple seeds have a little bit of cyanide in them. I mean, they're poisonous in abundance, right? So we don't eat the seeds of an apple. We eat the meat of the apple. And they don't have those plant defense chemicals. Now, I said roots, stems, leaves, seeds. These are where these plant defense chemicals are most abundant. So those are the things you want to avoid. So yes, spinach and kale and things of that nature. Now, you can also deactivate a lot of these plant defense chemicals by cooking your vegetables really, really well. But again, this is a subject for when we start bringing those foods back. For this, all intents and purposes, for these few weeks, we're avoiding those altogether. Grains and legumes. So grains and legumes, you wouldn't be able to eat them if you didn't have some way to process them, right? You don't go around chewing on wheat. You have to turn it into a flour. You got to mix it with water. You got to make a dough. You have to go through a whole process. Legumes, you have to boil legumes. You can't just eat legumes unless they're peanuts and they have their own problems. But when it comes to a lot of people say, oh, but isn't whole grain bread good or brown rice? And the answer is no, it's not. And the reason why is you would rather have, so if we go back to Asia and look back 4,000 years, the farmers went out of their way to turn rice into white rice, not brown rice. Why? They needed to remove all the protein off of the grain and leave what's left, which is the carbohydrate. The carbohydrate is everything. The carbohydrate is the energy, but the protein hull, which is what makes it brown rice, that's a plant defense chemical. That's there to irritate your gut. So it's better to go the extra step to have white rice. Now, why do people say brown rice is better? Because some nutritionist took a pound of brown rice and a pound of white rice and said, well, 2% of this pound of brown rice is protein. So you're getting 98% carbohydrate instead of 100% carbohydrate. So there's less carbohydrate, and therefore it's better for you if you're diabetic. That is complete and utter nonsense. If you want to if you're a diabetic, going from white rice to brown rice is going to do you no good. To think that the glycemic index of brown rice and white rice is so different is ridiculous. And the same thing is true for wheat. so whole grain breads. Now, those proteins, we talk about gluten being the protein in wheat. Wheat germ agglutinin is probably far more offensive to our gut and our system, our inflammatory system, than gluten is. So brown breads being better for you is totally mythical. It's made up. Matter of fact, if you had to eat bread, I would say it should be an organic heirloom wheat where the bread was made this morning and it's going to be croutons tomorrow in a fresh baked in a bakery. If it can sit nice and soft in a supermarket for a few weeks, you don't want to be eating that. There's stuff in there that is just toxic for you. Okay. Nuts and seeds. Well, they're nuts and seeds. They have the highest level of defense chemicals that there are. So I would avoid those entirely. But if you do bring them back roasted. The more you cook something, the more deactivated it is. Raw is going to be far more. It's going to have far more of the plant defense chemicals in there. So that is all I have as far as the prepared remarks that I have. I'm looking here now. I am seeing a few of the comments come through. Again, the audio is choppy. All right. Well, I'm going to post this up. I'll respond to your comments, questions. If you need me to do another event, I'm happy to do so. I apologize for any of the choppy audio or video in this presentation. I'll be sure that everything is working a whole lot better the next time. So anyway, have a wonderful week. Keep posting. Keep telling us how you're feeling. This is exciting stuff, and I want to know what topics you would like me to cover that I may not have covered for next week. So have a great day.